Hello everyone. Welcome to my new channel. On this channel, you will get all the latest and exclusive videos related to 90 Day Fiancé. If you love drama, real love stories, shocking twists, and emotional moments, then you are in the. They knocked just after 8. Not a warning, not a heads up, just 2 officers, a signed federal order, and a mother holding a spatula in one hand while her toddler sat at the kitchen table. Yara didn't cry right away. She asked if it was a mistake. One of the officers calmly told her, "This is final." And within minutes, she was gone. What happens when love, paperwork, and government silence collide? Hey everyone, I'm Sabrina and this is Drama Live, where we don't just recap the chaos, we trace it to its source. Today's story isn't just a reality TV shocker. It's the most heartbreaking chain reaction this franchise has ever aired. A woman pulled from her home, a family torn open, a legal system that doesn't blink, and a network forced to decide how much real pain belongs in prime time. Because what you saw on screen was only the surface. What was missed behind the scenes? Let's begin. On the outside, everything looked fine. Yara had started finding her rhythm in New Orleans. Waking up early, feeding Mila before Joy even had one eye open. The apartment was still a little cluttered, full of mismatched furniture and takeout boxes. But it felt like a home. Joy was traveling less, trying to be present, trading late nights with friends for bedtime stories and baby bottles. They fought less, or at least they fought quieter. Happily Ever After had them in a surprisingly mellow season. No screaming in public, no blowout fights over Europe versus Louisiana, just long conversations in the car, gentle jabs about parenting styles, and the occasional dig from Gwen that felt more like a reflex than real drama. On camera, it looked like a slow path toward peace. Yara even said it herself in a confessional. "Think maybe we're finally understanding each other," but there was something under the surface. Not in their marriage, not in their parenting. It was in the paperwork. Visas don't wait for your life to calm down. And neither does USCIS. The producers had tried to get them to talk about immigration stuff on screen, but Yara usually brushed it off. Everything is fine. She'd smile. "We have a lawyer," and the camera would move on. Behind the scenes, though, there had been a subtle shift. Their original attorney had taken on new clients, handed off some case files, and stopped responding quite as fast. Joy mentioned once in passing that they were waiting on a renewal notice. Yara, busy juggling motherhood, trusted that the legal team had it covered. Why wouldn't she? They'd used that office before. It had worked before. But the letters started coming in slowly. The first one was standard, a request for evidence, just routine, the kind of thing every immigrant goes through at some point. It asked for proof of cohabitation, proof of marriage stability, updated forms, and it had a deadline. No one saw it. Or rather, someone saw it. Someone at the lawyer's office, but it never made its way to Yara. Didn't even make its way to Jovi. And why would it? The mailing address on file was the attorney's office. That's what most people do, that's what they were told to do. So, Yara kept living like everything was under control. The days blurred into preschool applications, grocery runs, makeup tutorials, and filming schedules. Mila started talking more. Joy was trying harder. Things weren't perfect, but they were normal. And for this couple, normal was a win. But the system doesn't care if your life is peaceful. Second letter followed. More serious this time. Intent to deny. Still nothing reached their actual mailbox. Still no phone call warning them. Yara spent most of that month planning Ma's birthday and filming B-roll with the crew. She wore pastel dresses, talked about maybe opening a boutique, and brushed off questions about paperwork delays. The producers didn't push. They had other storylines to chase. Something small was already ticking in the background, waiting to explode. And then came the formal denial. That one should have triggered alarm bells. It should have led to a frantic phone call, an emergency appeal, a rush to fix what was missing. Instead, it got stamped received at the law office, marked no response, and quietly died in a pile of unopened mail. The clock started running. The case was referred to ICE for enforcement. Yara still didn't know. Joy didn't know. Mila definitely didn't know. And while they filmed beach scenes and talked about taking a break from filming after the season, somewhere in a dusty mailroom, the final order of removal was already printing. Sitting in that lawyer's office next to expired magazines and forgotten business cards was a letter that would change everything. It started like most immigration issues do, quietly. The first letter, the request for evidence, is almost never urgent by itself. It's like getting a homework reminder. The government's way of saying we need more proof that this marriage is still real, still stable, still cohabiting. For anyone who's been through a K-1 process, it's routine and it's also time-sensitive. You usually get 87 days to respond. Yara's file was marked for that standard review. Maybe because it had been a while since her last update. Maybe because the new baby changed their household status. Maybe just because immigration offices do random reviews. It doesn't matter why. What matters is what happened next. That evidence was never submitted. The file sat still. Then came the intent to deny. That's the government's way of escalating. A second letter. It says, "You didn't answer. So unless we hear from you immediately, we'll consider your case non-compliant." This is where most people spring into action. It's the red siren letter. But again, it was sent to the attorney's office, and no one told Yara. She kept living like nothing had changed. Next came the formal denial. It doesn't mince words. It states that conditional residency has been revoked. That legal status has expired and that because there was no appeal filed within the grace period, the case is closed. And closed means flagged. Immigration systems are automated. When that flag hits the record, it starts a countdown. The case moves from the service side to ICE, the enforcement side, from paperwork to people with badges. And here's where the dominoes don't stop. According to one immigration attorney, not connected to the case, but familiar with federal procedure. Once a case goes from USCIS denial to ICE review, it's usually treated as abandonment. The assumption is they didn't care enough to fix it. So, we enforce the order. That's the part that burns. Because in reality Yara did care. She just didn't know. The letters went somewhere else. The clock ran out out of communication. She was trusting the system, or at least the people she paid to navigate it for her. And the lawyer hasn't responded publicly, but according to multiple former clients, that office had already been slipping. Missed calls, slow filings, internal staffing cuts. Legal experts say this is where the system shows no mercy. In the words of one immigration professor, the U.S. immigration process is not designed for grace. If a case looks abandoned, it's treated like it is, regardless of the backstory. And by the time ICE is involved, compassion is no longer a factor. This wasn't drama for anymore. It was bureaucracy with handcuffs attached. That removal order was signed 3 weeks before Yara even knew her status had changed. And that detail matters because it explains the coldness of what came next. By the time the knock happened, the decision wasn't being considered, it wasn't being reviewed, it was already filed, already coded into a system that doesn't care about bedtime routines or family photos or a little girl learning how to say, "mama," in 2 languages. And this is where the story gets uglier than what any episode can show, because the moment paperwork becomes enforcement, the human part of the equation is basically treated like noise. Here's what most viewers don't understand. When something goes wrong with immigration paperwork, you imagine a warning, a call, an opportunity to explain. But in this kind of scenario, the system is built to move forward unless you stop it, and you can't stop something you don't even know is happening. So while Yara was living a normal life, posting small updates, filming scenes, and trying to be a mom in a place that still didn't feel like hers, the government's timeline was moving like a separate universe. And in that universe, Yara wasn't a wife, a mother, or a cast member. She was a case number that had gone quiet. Now let's talk about the part that reality TV almost never shows. The days right before it all happened. Because deportations, removals, detentions, all of that comes with a build-up. Not for the person being taken, but for the people doing the taking. It starts with verification. Someone checks the address. Someone checks the last known employment. Someone checks whether there's a child, whether there's a spouse, whether there are any pending court matters. And if there's nothing active on file, it gets marked as clear for action. That's not emotion. That's procedure. The kind of procedure that sounds neat and organized on paper but feels like an ambush in real life. And if you're wondering why they would show up at a home like that, early morning, no warning, here's the harsh truth. Early morning is strategic. People are home. People are disoriented. It's less likely they'll run, less likely there's a crowd, less likely a lawyer is reachable, less likely anyone has time to create chaos. And that's exactly why the knock came, just after 8. Not because it's dramatic. Because it's efficient. Let's go back to that kitchen for a second. Because the image matters. A toddler at a table. A mother holding a spatula. A normal morning that becomes a permanent before and after. Yara doesn't cry right away because shock doesn't always look like tears. Shock looks like logic trying to wrestle with something that makes no sense. Is this a mistake? Is what people say when they still believe there's a version of reality where the rules bend for context. But the officer's answer, "This is final," tells you everything about where they were in the process. They weren't there to talk. They were there to execute. And if you're thinking, okay, but where was Jovi? That's one of the most important questions, and it's also one of the messiest answers. Because what happens to a couple like this is never just about a visa. It's about patterns. It's about who handles the hard stuff and who assumes someone else handled it. It's about the quiet ways one person carries the mental load until one missed email becomes a disaster. In the public story, Jovi is the guy who travels for work, the guy who tries but doesn't always get it right, the guy who loves his family but can be careless. In a legal crisis, those personality traits stop being TV drama and start being real risk. So when the system moved, it moved through the gaps in their life. And the biggest gap was that they weren't watching the mailbox, because the mailbox wasn't theirs. It was the lawyer's. Now let's zoom out for a minute to the network side of this, because this is where the story turns into something even darker. Reality TV loves conflict, but it usually loves safe conflict. A fight about nightlife. A disagreement about where to live. A tense conversation with a mother-in-law. But when the conflict becomes government enforcement, the show hits a wall. Because there's a difference between filming drama and filming trauma. And if this situation is being presented as part of a storyline, then the network has to answer a question they hate answering. How much of this is entertainment, and how much is exploitation? And here's why that matters for you watching. Because what you saw on screen was edited. What happened behind the scenes wasn't. And the crew, the producers, the sound people, they're humans standing in a room watching a woman be told she has to leave her home. There's no script for that. There's no reshoot. There's no, "Can we do that line again?" The camera becomes a witness. And a witness is not neutral, no matter how much reality TV pretends it is. So what did they do? If you're imagining a full crew filming every moment, think again. When real legal enforcement happens, the rules change fast. Cameras can be told to stop. People can be ordered away. Footage can become unusable. And even if it's legally captured, airing it is a separate decision. This is why, if you're hearing a version of this story, there are gaps. Those gaps are where the scariest parts usually are. Here's a likely sequence that fits how these situations typically unfold. After the initial contact, they tell the person to gather essentials. Identification, any documents, maybe a small bag, maybe medication, maybe something for the child. Then there's the question, does the child go? And that's where everything breaks. Because if the child is a US citizen, and the parent is being removed, you run into a nightmare decision that no family is prepared for at 8 in the morning. Does the child stay with the US parent? Does the child go with the removed parent? Is there time to call anyone? Is there a temporary guardian? Is the spouse even present to make a decision? And this is where "family torn apart forever" stops being a catchy headline and becomes a real fear. Because forever doesn't always mean permanent. Sometimes it means indefinitely. Sometimes it means months or years of legal limbo. Sometimes it means missed birthdays and first days of school and FaceTime calls that end with a child screaming because she doesn't understand why mommy is on a screen. Now, I want to be careful here, because I'm not telling you this as confirmed fact about real-life people. I'm telling you the anatomy of how stories like this work when immigration enforcement collides with family life. And if this is the narrative being pushed, these are the kinds of consequences that would logically follow. And the reason I'm spelling it out is because so many viewers get stuck on the headline. Deported. Final decision. Torn apart. But the real story is what happens in the hours after. Because that's when the phone calls start, and that's when you find out who's actually in your corner. Picture Jovi finding out. Maybe he's at work. Maybe he's in transit. Maybe he's asleep because of a shift schedule. However it happens, it hits like a truck. At first he doesn't believe it. Then he gets angry. Then he starts bargaining, calling the lawyer, calling anyone, asking what can be done. And that's when the worst answer comes back. We can try, but it's already final. That word again. Final. People don't realize how terrifying that word is in legal contexts. It's not emotional final. It's procedural final. It means the train left the station days ago and you're running after it barefoot. So what does Jovi do next? He calls his mom. And if you know anything about Gwen's role in their relationship, you know that call would not be calm. Gwen loves her granddaughter. Gwen has always had opinions about Yara. Sometimes protective, sometimes critical, sometimes both in the same sentence. But when something threatens the child's stability, Gwen's focus sharpens. And in a moment like this, Gwen isn't thinking about old fights. She's thinking about Mila. Where is Mila? Who has Mila? Is Yara taking Mila? Is someone stopping her? Is Mila crying? Is Mila safe? And that's the moment the whole family flips from relationship drama to emergency mode. And emergency mode reveals everyone's true priorities fast. Now, let's talk about the lawyer again, because this is where the rage in the audience usually lands. People want a villain that isn't the system. They want a person who dropped the ball. And if the narrative is that notices were sent to the attorney's address and never forwarded, then yes, that's a catastrophic failure. But even in that, there's another layer viewers miss. Immigration cases are built on deadlines, and when a deadline is missed, the system punishes the immigrant, not the professional. The immigrant loses status. The immigrant gets flagged. The immigrant gets removed. Meanwhile, the office that failed to communicate might face consequences later. But later doesn't undo the damage. Later doesn't put a mother back in her kitchen. Later doesn't rewind trauma. So in the hours after Yara is taken, the lawyer's office becomes a battlefield. Calls. Voicemails. Panic. And if the office is truly disorganized or understaffed, you get the most infuriating thing imaginable. Silence. No immediate return call. No clear answer. Just hold music while someone's life collapses. And that's when you see Jovi's personality shift. Because he's no longer the laid-back guy who avoids conflict. He becomes the guy who needs control and can't get it. He becomes the guy who is going to snap at anyone who tells him to wait. And if the show captures any part of this, this is where a lot of viewers would start taking sides. Some people would blame Jovi for not staying on top of the paperwork. Some people would blame Yara for trusting the lawyer. Some people would blame the lawyer. Some people would blame the government. The truth is, it's usually a chain. A chain of small choices that felt reasonable until they became lethal. But here's the most painful part. Even if Jovi did everything right after the knock, the first 48 hours are still brutal. Because removal processes move fast once they start. There's intake. There's processing. There's holding. There are limited calls. There are rules about contact. There are time windows. And while that's happening, Mila needs stability. She needs food, sleep, comfort, a familiar voice. She doesn't care about federal orders. She cares that mom isn't there. So Jovi is pulled in two directions. Fight the system and parent a traumatized child. And that split is what tears families apart emotionally. Even when they're still together legally. Gwen may step in. She may become the anchor, the one who holds Mila while Jovi makes calls. But even that introduces tension, because Gwen and Yara have history. If Gwen becomes the person Mila clings to while Yara is gone, that creates a new emotional reality. It can make Yara feel replaced. It can make Jovi feel indebted. It can make Gwen feel justified in every criticism she ever had. And those feelings can poison a marriage even if the couple reunites later. Because the aftermath doesn't end when someone returns. It ends when the family stops flinching at every knock on the door. Now let's go to the question everyone asks next. Can't they just fix it? People think immigration is like renewing a license. Mess up, pay a fee, correct it. But if a case is truly in final removal status, reversing it often requires heavy legal intervention. Motions to reopen. Emergency stays. Proof of ineffective assistance of counsel if the lawyer failed. Documentation. Affidavits. Timelines. And here's the cruel part. You have to prove you deserve mercy in a system that isn't built to offer it quickly. You have to prove you didn't ignore the deadlines. You have to prove the lawyer failed you. You have to prove you acted the moment you learned. And while you're proving all that, your family is living the consequences. So this becomes the next chapter. The scramble. Jovi hires a new attorney. A good one. An aggressive one. Someone who knows how to file emergency motions and get a stay. Someone who knows what judges respond to. Someone who knows how to turn final into pending again. Because in immigration, pending is life. Pending means you can breathe. Pending means you have a chance. But getting back to pending is like climbing out of a pit while the walls crumble. And the show, if it's filming, will try to capture that scramble. Meetings with attorneys. Paperwork on the table. Confessionals where Jovi says he feels like he failed. Gwen in tears. Mila crying for her mother. But here's the catch. If the show turns this into content, it risks crossing a moral line. Because this is not will they move to Europe? This is will a child see her mom this month? And when the stakes are that high, the audience doesn't just watch. They react. They flood comments. They harass people. They demand answers. They start tagging agencies, politicians, the network. And that creates a pressure cooker that can either help the family by amplifying attention, or harm them by making officials dig in harder. And yes, that happens. Public pressure can influence outcomes, but it can also trigger backlash, especially if authorities feel like they're being challenged publicly. So the family is trapped again, not just in a legal system, but in a public spectacle. And that is the real government silence colliding with love. Because love wants reassurance. Love wants communication. Love wants a person to look you in the eyes and say, "We'll fix it." Government systems don't do that. They send forms. They send denials. They send officers. And if you miss the form stage, you get the officer stage. That's the collision. Now, I want to bring you to the part that viewers would never see unless someone leaked it or someone described it later. The moment Yara realizes this isn't a mistake. Not when the officer says, "Final." Not when she's escorted. It hits when she can't call who she wants to call. When she can't grab what she wants to grab. When she realizes her child's toys are still on the floor, her coffee is still cooling on the counter, her phone charger is still plugged into the wall, and she's walking away anyway. That's when the tears come, not because she suddenly got hates being powerless. She moved countries. She built a life. She learned a new culture. She took heat from people who didn't understand her accent or her boundaries. She fought to keep her identity. A person like that doesn't collapse easily. But this is the kind of situation that breaks even the strongest people because it's not a fight you can win by being strong. It's a fight you win by being procedurally perfect. And she wasn't given the chance to be. So what happens next in this story? The family tries to pull every lever they have. Jovi uses whatever resources he can. TLC decides what to air and what to blur. The internet chooses villains. The lawyer's office goes quiet or goes defensive. Gwen tries to hold the child together. And Yara, alone in a process that doesn't care about her, has to survive long enough for someone else to fix what should never have been broken. And here's the final twist of part 1. The twist that sets the tone for everything after. Because when the family finally gets access to the file, when the new attorney finally pulls the record, they see it in black and white. The government didn't deport Yara because they hated her, and they didn't do it because of reality TV, and they didn't do it because she was a bad person. They did it because the file shows no response. 3 times. Request for evidence. No response. Intent to deny. No response. Denial. No appeal. To the system that looks like abandonment. And if you want to understand how a life can fall apart quietly, understand this. The system is designed to interpret silence as choice. And Yara's silence wasn't hers. It was a paperwork silence. An office silence. A human error silence. But the punishment lands on her body anyway. And in the next part, we're going to get into what happens when Jovi confronts the people who were supposed to protect them, what decides to do with the footage, and the moment Yara's family back home hears what happened and says the one thing Jovi never expected to hear.